Good morning to everyone. I see we have 56 people joining us this morning. Thank you all. I appreciate you being here. And I'm sure you're as excited as I am to hear from these lovely ladies. And they're going to talk about library ethics. They're coming all the way from Kansas to join us this morning. And I guess it's going to be in the 70s there next week. So it's sunny and warm. And I'm going to ask everyone to please mute unless you have a question. And you can type your questions in chat, or if you'd like to join us, you can use your microphones and ask a question that way too. So without further ado, I'm going to let these ladies go ahead and introduce themselves, tell you what they want to tell you. And I have to say, they are also going to be part of the ARSO leadership program as well. Is that correct, ladies? Yes, I'll let you.
Correct.
I'll let you, and that's very exciting. And I think it's an honor that they well deserve, and anyone who participates in that will get a lot from their presentations and anything else they're offering. Okay, so without further ado, ladies, take it away.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hello, my name is Maribeth Shafer, and I'm the Assistant Director and the Continuing Education Consultant for Central Kansas Libraries. I'm going to let Patty and Gail introduce themselves, and then we'll tell you a little bit about CKLS, and then we'll get into the meat of it. Gail?
Okay. I'm Gail Santy. I'm the director of the Central Kansas Library System, but I also have the honor of being the director of the Great Bend Public Library. So I have the Ivory Tower and the daily practice.
Good morning. My name is Patty Collins, and I'm a general consultant with the specialty in youth services. And your presenters today have a combination of more than 50 years library experience. And as we were telling our host this morning that we've done just about every job in a library as well. So we speak your language, and we hope that we've helped you find some solutions today. Welcome.
Great. So I'm going to give a brief overview of CKLS just so you kind of know where we're coming from and why we're talking about ethics today. So Central Kansas Library System is one of 7 systems in Kansas, and we are directed by state statute to support library service where it exists and to create library services where it does not. And part of that is training library directors and library boards, not only on Kansas library law, but also on library best practices, the Library Bill of Rights, and that also comes in part with library ethics. Today we do have several scenarios that we could help guide the conversation, but we are asking you to please add your questions to the chat, and we would prefer actually to talk about your ethic questions, but if we need to move the conversation forward, we have some scenarios as backup as well.
And if you prefer to stay anonymous, you can direct message Maribeth, Patty, or I, and we will read your comment out, but we will not include your name. And if it's more comfortable for you to unmute and talk, you're welcome to do that as well. And please don't hesitate to interrupt us. We have a slideshow to help keep us on track and to help bring us back to the subject if we get distracted.
And all our scenarios are from real events that have happened either to one of us or to a colleague that we helped train. So they are not from a mythical place that we pulled from a hat. There are actual scenarios that we've dealt with. All right, so I'm going to go to the first scenario, and then please interrupt us with your questions. A middle-aged man comes to the front desk and asks if Sam is in the library. What do you do?
So this is your opportunity to share. What would you do here? There we go. Sarah in chat says you can't ID patrons, you can't identify them. That is correct.
And there's a lot of information that's you have to kind of infer from this situation. You know, we don't know how old Sam is. We don't know who the middle-aged man is. But Sarah really cuts it to the quick, is you can't ID patrons. So how do you respond to this middle-aged man?
We also don't know in this scenario if Sam is not a staff member. And if you're in a large metro library, you might not know if Sam works there or not, or what this middle-aged man's purpose of visiting with Sam might be. We also don't know if Sam is male or female.
Right. So
and that might give you a question.
Yeah, there's a lot of safety issues that come up with this.
Right.
Is this person asking for a coworker and the coworker has known issues or altercations or just some concerns about this patron? Or is this a man looking for a child? Or is this a man looking for, you know, an adult? We don't know.
A spouse.
And a spouse. We don't know. And it may change. That's a good, excellent, Rochelle. Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know who Sam is. There's also, you could twist this a little bit. We've also added, what if it turns out the middle-aged man is a police officer asking for Sam in the library?
Mm-hmm.
It's not specified here, and you would think if it's police ever, it'd say in the question, but what happens if a police officer comes in and asks for a patron?
Or a truant officer.
Or a truant officer.
Heidi says, I'm not sure who you are referring to, but I would be happy to help you. Right? What if it's a vendor and Sam is part of acquisitions, but Sam forgot to say, hey, I've got a vendor coming. They're going to ask for me at the desk. That's another option that's perfectly harmless.
So there's, you know, this also then brings up other questions. And I think you're going to discover that when we have these scenarios, we always have, but there's more questions. We need to know more. What if it is somebody looking for a senior citizen who maybe is in a fugue state with dementia or Alzheimer's? What if it's a missing child? This is where you're going to discover that your personal ethics may conflict with your professional ethics. You want to help find a child, a missing child, or a silver alert, a missing adult. But there are things that you also have to know where your line is and know where those special circumstances help you to make the right decision. You also need to know what your library policy is.
Yes. As I always say,
back to policy.
I always say it always comes back to policy, and policy is only as good as the procedures and the training. We've got, or the middle-aged man is an angry ex-spouse. Absolutely right. Diana says, I can't identify anyone for you, but I can page a person. We find that only the biggest libraries in our area have paging capabilities. Some of them are very small, and so the person could look around and see if Sam is there or not.
And that's usually what our...
Procedurally, you have to determine whether or not paging a person is something that is a part of your library environment, because depending on the library environment you have, it might be this is a quiet place, and that's not an option. It also might be, Sam is very unidentified here, and it just might be, do I just call Sam to the desk and might get 7 people show up at the desk? What does that look like? So there are a lot of questions, and we leave some of these very obscure on purpose, because this is exactly what happens. And when you go through this today, you're going to see this like, yep, this one was me. Yep, this one's me. They're going to look like your own situations, because
I did that wrong. Paging Sam could put Sam in danger and harm. If Sam is a staff member, I would ask the person who they are and what they are here for, and I will let them know that I will see if Sam is available. Very good. Sam may not want to talk to this person. I don't like to talk to drop-in vendors. I don't. I just don't. I don't have the time for it. If Sam is a random person, I would say, I don't know, but they're welcome to walk through the building. I've said that to police officers and truant officers as well.
Because it is a public space.
It is.
And
And
that's
it
something
depends on the relationship you've got with your police department. Sometimes you will let them walk through the building. Sometimes, you know, they won't be able to go into the private spaces. It really depends on what your policy says. This scenario could also go along with I've got the phone call and someone's asking for Sam. Now, we know Sam is one of the underage children who are old enough to be in the library by themselves, but really you've got to have it in policy what the staff response is to that. Because do you page the child? How do you know who that person is on the phone? Now, I was trained by the military in voice recognition and it comes in handy, but I can't rely on that as a tool. If someone is calling,
But
there
Gail,
are ways to change a person's voice. You've really got to
what if I call? What if I'm a mom and that I'm absolutely, I mean, I know Sam left the house. He was supposed to be at the library. He's not come home yet. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right. And that's where you need to, the parent needs to have, or the adult in charge needs to have the conversation before they get there. If you've got a policy that says a child could use the phone to make a phone call, or a patron, because in most instances, your patron behavior policy should apply to all ages, not separate them out by ages. If you've got a policy that says that the patron can use the phone to make a phone call, make sure your policy says a local or a long distance phone call, because that's going to make a difference to your bill. And a lot of people only have cell phones, and that might be a long distance call. That may be something that you can't put onto your in your policy. So that needs to be done ahead of time with that parent and child. And the response to Patty's scenario there, sub scenario, would that be what it is? I don't know. Is that parent, when the parent is distressed, it's not the right time to tell them they should have done this before, and essentially they're doing bad parenting by not doing this. This is not the time. It is to say that, please come to the library and look around yourself. I'll be glad to help you look around. It's hard to say things like that when someone is in distress or in angry on the other phone. So what we always recommend is some scripted language for anybody who's working the service desks. That way, if that patron calls a different extension, they're going to get the exact same answer. If they go to person A, they should get the same answer from person B. They shouldn't get a different answer, because then that means that the procedure that is written to this policy is no good. And I always say that one of the most important things policies is a safety net for the staff. You know, when you're on the front line, you're walking a tightrope. The policies and the procedures are the safety net for the staff, so they know how to operate within that policy.
And that helps your staff know what to answer, but it also helps patrons learn that they can't go to one person and then go to the next person trying to get the answer they want. You know, you go ask mom and then you go ask dad, kind of thing. That also helps with your patrons.
I also think that your scripted language is awesome. Policy is necessary. Procedure is necessary. But I also think it's important to empower staff and to train them in these values and ethics, so that if they come upon a situation, they can make a good judgment call, and that they know that there's not a lot that they can really, really break that we can't fix as administrators. But that comes with training and with confidence.
Thank you.
And,
yes.
and speaking about scripted language, I follow several customer service gurus. So if you're looking for ways to learn some of that scripted language, Southwest Airlines, the book is The Southwest Airlines Way, and the Disney Guide to Customer Service both teach good examples of how to teach that scripted language. And so I'm going to use the example that you always hear about Disney is a cast member, which is what a Disney employee is called. A cast member will get a question, and the question is what time is the 4 o'clock parade? Now, we as librarians all go to, it's at 4 o'clock, but the cast member is told to say, I can show you the parade will be starting in about 15 minutes. I can show you the best viewing location. they didn't answer the question going, it's 4 o'clock, but they have other words to say. And so if you're looking for a couple of places to borrow, the other book that you might be looking for is the Southwest Airlines Way. They do appear on a couple of book lists that I'll put in the chat for you here in just a minute. One of the items that I need to talk about just for a minute is the Black Belt Librarian by Warren Graham. If you have questions of building safety and security, this is the Bible. This little 100-page Bible is a must read for a librarian in any level of position. And we're going to talk about some other books here in just a few minutes that we tend to rely on a lot. So,
And we each have our favorites.
I do have a new scenario in the chat. Are we ready to move on to that?
Yes.
Okay, let me find it. If you are a fine-free library and other library patrons visit your library from a fine-charging library, how do you handle the patron's overdue fine? So my first question is, do you have a shared, I'm guessing you have a shared catalog, and that's how you know they have a fine. What is your policy, and what is your patron privacy policy?
Well, and also, what is your consortial? If you've got a shared catalog, there should be some shared procedures. We have a shared catalog, and one of the things that we also have is libraries that charge fines and libraries that don't charge fines. And so we realized this was going to be an issue and it would be confusing with patrons. And so what we've determined is a way for those staff members to acknowledge that. Is it that, oh, I see you've got some overdue items at this library. I'm going to need you to go there and get that cleared up. And then I'll be able to check these out for you. Would you like me to hold these for you at the desk? That's one of the things that we've done because we really didn't want to get in the business of taking 20 cents and then somehow trying to get it to a library 3 counties away. So if you don't have those procedures in place, that's something I would recommend that you bring to the shakers and movers or the administrators of your consortium, is sort of a, how are we going to deal with this? And what will we tell our patrons, and what would they tell the other patrons? Because it could be the other way, is that they charge fines, but they come in and they see that the patron has overdues from another library. And do those fines transfer? Do they stay with the original library? And what do we do? And so part of that is, okay, how are we going to handle money? And what are we going to do with patrons who go from one library to another?
And how do we respect other libraries and not at the expense of treating people inequitably?
Right. And
so that's a very good point, because
where are we at with that privacy? We can see everybody else's stuff, but should they be looking? No. But what about overdues is one of the things, or lost or damaged books fall right in there as well. And what if a patron is banned from one branch or library for behavior? Does that go across the board, or do they have an opportunity to use library service in another community?
And do some libraries have some kind of, like a new patron, sometimes they have like a trial period kind of where you can check out only a couple items at a time until their address is fully confirmed or something along those lines. What if there's a procedure or policy that you could say, I see you have some overdue books at another library, but I can let you check out 2 items from here.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is. Once you return all your books, then we're happy to check out as many more as you want. Something along those lines. I would never say what the books are very loudly unless they ask specifically what they are. I would say these need to be resolved at the home library if that's how your policy works for your shared catalog. I would definitely say if they're just like, I know the book's returned, but I still have the outstanding fine, it's going to be a situational thing, I think, because you don't want to have to stop some kid from finishing his book report because he has a $1 fine and now he can't get his book on Native Americans or whatever it is.
Will you take partial fines so they can check out? What does the policy say on that?
And what does your policy say regarding the age of the patron? Because Maribeth mentioned the child with the book report. Mom is the one who drove to the next county and checked out those books. And so where does that fall in? Because there are some things that are age related, and you're going to discover here before we're done today that I'm the child advocate on this panel, and I'm always going to ask the question about what about the kid, because the kids have library rights that match adults in most libraries, but
except they don't drive.
Except for they don't drive, and
They don't drive.
So
And
we
they don't-
do need to keep those considerations in.
They don't
Right,
have
and
a basis
you're-
of income either. So
You're really going to need to know what your state laws say about what information parents can get off of a child's account. I have a good comment about the overdue fines is that, some libraries do and some don't. It was very clear to me that I wanted my library to be fine free, and luckily they went fine free beforehand, but I was instrumental in that because I was a consultant at the time and I was writing for the newsletter to really explain that fines should never be considered a source of revenue, and that in most instances fines were a real big barrier to providing good customer service. So it's kind of tricky because not everybody comes to that realization at the same time, and boards especially don't. And boards may be the ones that say, but we get $3,000 a year from overdue fines. This is an important source of revenue for us. So give your fellow librarians some grace with this, because they may be all ready to go fine free, but their boards aren't. And that's where board training comes in. And some libraries never will be ready for that. It is a sticky wicket.
So there is another comment on this one, and then I know that Patty has a question as well. So in the consortium, it looks like they're encouraged to collect the fines, but the fines aren't forwarded to the other library. So my follow-up question is, if you are allowed to collect the fines, I would think that you're also allowed to determine what currency they can use to collect the fines. Some libraries allow children and maybe even adults to read off their fines. And that, I think, is an excellent option, especially for children, because if they don't have a source of income and a way to pay off that fine, now they have a way to do that. And I think that's something to consider.
Right. And so if they're allowed to do that, that's one option. Another option is, are they allowed to pay that fine off in increments? And if they're paying in increments, are they still allowed to borrow, or are they just cut off? And so that was strong language that I used. And I'm sorry, it gave me a real insight into my personal ideas there. But those are the things that'll need to be considered as well. And who makes that determination?
And some libraries have amnesty weeks, and even libraries that don't collect fines have amnesty weeks. So that people that have always been avoiding the library, because I know I have that overdue book, now they can bring it back, no questions asked kind of thing. Other libraries do food drive for fine. So bring in a canned good and it takes a certain amount off your fines as well. I did see today, there was a big library, and I don't remember where, but they just went fine free, and they forgave over $300,000 in overdue fines. So I think
money
that's
they weren't going to collect.
Yes.
But it's bringing people back to the library that have worried about that $1.25 they've owed since 1975.
Yeah, it's a gesture of goodwill. Okay.
So you can already see that some of our personalities are coming through, but also some of our personal
Soapboxes.
soapboxes, there we go, will come through as well. And it does, each one of these questions will leave you in the professional librarian versus the personal person who gets to go home at the end of the day. And sometimes you're going to go home tortured about these things.
And we'll also notice that we never have black and white answers.
Yeah.
Because I think we all believe this. It's very situational. Finding Sam in the library is different if it's a worried mom looking for, or worried dad looking for Sam, versus somebody that has had interactions with Sam, the coworker, and Sam doesn't feel safe.
Right. And you can see how easy it is to get off track.
A private question in the chat. Have you ever seen an ethics statement that staff would sign? We do this with boards, but when the staff are there, there's only issues with patron privacy, but also the consistent issue of discussing difficult patrons while at work in open areas.
Oh, yes. Now
A
in Kansas,
multi-level question. Just wondering if there is a tandem of some staff-focused ethics trainings that would combine an ethics statement for staff members.
in Kansas, actually, by statute, all library workers are supposed to sign an ethics statement, and it's because they're paid with tax dollars. In reality, that's hidden deep inside statutes, not in the library law section, and it really doesn't happen. Some employers, some libraries do have something that employees sign when they come to work that says, I'm not going to do this or that, but usually those are written by administration or HR, and they don't address patron confidentiality and patron privacy. So be sure you find out what your own state statutes say and get them aligned or not. Laura says, I cover ethics and give all new employees the ALA ethics statement.
We also have a privacy statement. We have a shared catalog as well. And we have, we send it to all our libraries, and the director is supposed to sign it, but everybody that has access to the shared catalog signs the patron privacy statement, which is very much the European GNRP, GMPR, confidentiality.
And we do have to sometimes remediate library staff on what that looks like, because just because you can see other library patrons, you shouldn't be looking. I have a message, and it says, I'm a newish director and have inherited these overdue fine patrons. I do not want to have this shadow of failure hanging over my head. I will never be able to collect these fines, and it frustrates me. And what I would recommend to you is you start talking to your library board now. Talk about how old some of these fines are. You're not going to talk about the patrons in particular, but you're going to talk about how old these fines are, or how long this book has been lost. And this is money that is not yours. You're not going to collect it. When you read through the ethics stuff that we've provided, you're going to come up with some good language to speak to your board, and they may let you declare an amnesty week and wipe everybody clean. Because what that also does is, if you've got those patrons with fines, is you're holding on to patrons who have been inactive for a long, long time. And that means that when you report your number of registered borrowers or your patrons for your state report, that skews your data. It skews it in a major way. And that's one of the things you'll want to talk to your board about as well.
When I moved into a position that was the hometown for a military base, I moved into that position in 2002, and also got with that, as head of circulation, 2 file cabinets that were completely full of files that all said overdue military. And they went back to, the library was built in 1982, and that was the oldest file I found. I'm never going to find those people again. And I had to do an awful lot of negotiating with my director and with the board in order to let those, because I was never going to find those people. And the best thing I could do was make my library records correct, but also take care of that, because if they did come back in the door, it would take us hours just to go find the old account for, $1.96. It just wasn't worth it. That's time is money. I mean, that's the basic lesson. And that's another issue that comes down. How do we equate that time with some of these? Because as you can see, it doesn't take long to take one situation and turn it into 15 more parts. We're filling the chat with links to some of these presentations, and also to some statements like the ALA Bill of Rights, the Freedom to Read, and the Public Library Ethics Statement. There's also in the handouts an example of a Public Library Trustee Conflict of Interest Statement as one of those integral pieces of your trustee training.
We'll touch back on that in a little bit.
Did we answer all the parts of the question that you had, Patty?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I thought we had some more.
Basically, is there a training that handles some of these, and what does that ethics statement that staff would sign, what would it look like?
there's not a canned training statement that I'm aware, a training program that I'm aware of. We do find that the scenarios are exceptionally good for training on these kinds of things and customer service as well, because it's something that actually happened. And we all know that patron, or we know the patron that claims to have returned every single item they've ever had that was overdue. And then they find them later and bring it back or something like that. I suggest you use the scenarios, and you can certainly have them train on this as well.
And I
what
think
we realized early is we could train until the cows come home again and again and again. We'll never run out of scenarios, and we'll never have enough time to train on everything.
that's what I was
think
going to
one
add.
of the underlying questions in her question was, how do I deal with staff members discussing patrons?
Oh, yes. So that one of the things that I put in our policy that the board really liked in our patron behavior policy is our promise to you as a staff member to you, and that is patron confidentiality. And that says things like, we will only discuss patron concerns in private. I mean, and we've got a staff break room, but if you get loud and animated, you can hear it right on the floor. That's an on-the-spot correction that needs to be made. And that comes into things like having difficult conversations with your employees. All of your managers should be trained on how to do an on-the-spot correction quickly and compassionately. All of your staff members should be trained on how to tag team concerns or issues. If you have a coworker who is just had a tough interaction with a patron, or they look like they're struggling, that's the other staff members should be trained on how to graciously tag in and assist that other coworker, or tag in and let that coworker take a break. Those are really important, but that's going to be ongoing training on a regular basis. And you need to kind of create an atmosphere and a culture where having someone step in and correct is not punishment, it's guidance and it's assistance. And if you're the director, that starts with you. You have to be open to having people say, hey, I need to be honest with you about something. It's kind of tricky, but it's very important. You'll find it goes far.
So Patty's showing some books in her windows. The first one she showed was Radical Candor, and it is pretty awesome. This is the one we reference a lot. It's challenging directly, but caring personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can say, this might not be the best place to have this conversation, or remember where you are might be a good way to just address that. And of course, if they continue, it's like, remember that we need to keep patron confidentiality or patron issues private.
Well, you know, if I went into the bank and I was just doing a transaction, but over at the next teller, I heard two people talking about somebody else and their account and how that damn Gail Santy is overdrawn again. Can you believe it? That bank would lose my patronage, and they would lose all credibility with me and every single other person I talk to. And so when you talk to your staff about talking about patrons out in the public, that's a good example that you can give them. Your community has a choice now where they get their reading materials from. They don't have to come to the library. You have to court their business. And that's not to say that the patron is always right, but they have a right to privacy, and we have an obligation to keep that privacy confidentiality.
Yeah, and Patty had another book, The Homeless Librarian, I believe is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also very good. A Librarian's Guide to Homelessness. Thank you, that's the correct term. And Patty, why don't you talk about it?
You've made me familiar since you're all Illinois folks. I'm sure you've heard of and seen Ryan Dowd before, but in this book, he does talk about the cone of safety and the easy way to tag out. Basically, we learned how to social distance in this last few months, and basically, it's the triangle of safety where if you're lucky enough, and we know we have some one-person libraries out there, and we talk well to those as well, but if you're lucky enough to have some people to back you up, basically one is kind of always on tap nearby, and they're watching the conversation, and sometimes they just step in and take over, because sometimes you know that through body language, through voice inflection, that it's time for somebody else to take over for you. And he does a super job of explaining that. And that is one of those techniques that if you have a staff, that's one of those things that you should practice. It might be in your library, you might have the safe call. In our library, it was always, Mr. Green is on the phone for you. Mr. Green means you need to go to the back office because I saw Mr. Johnson come in the building and you're going to need a break today, because he's already hit the door and he's already come running, and he always gets to Maribeth. And Maribeth gets a little flustered and it comes off, and you know, and so it's just that matter of having that backup and figuring out who you are personally, and some days there are people that you cannot deal with, and we also know that happens with coworkers, and so it's there. Some days you just need to step away, and so a couple of these books will help you a lot. We've put the book list links in the chat for you as well.
And I wanted to say, if you're a one-person library or you're the only person working when you're at the library, have somebody that's a friend or somebody nearby that you can text and say, come here now, that can just kind of wander in the library when one of your problem patrons comes in. A lot of our one-person libraries are in a city building, so there's always a city clerk or something. So you can just kind of say, hey, wander by, and make that kind of partnership with somebody who's close by that can wander over and help you out. And of course, then if they're in the same situation, you can wander over and help them out as well. Good questions. Thank you.
Woohoo. What's our next scenario?
What is our next scenario?
Because we've got a long ways from, is Sam there?
Here we go. Frank was arrested at the library and then returns weeks later. Another patron, Angela, complains and doesn't want Frank allowed in the library. What do you do? Wait a little bit longer for some answers in chat.
Chris says, I guess it kind of depends on why Frank was arrested.
And being arrested is not the same as being convicted.
Convicted.
Or does it matter why Frank was arrested?
Oh, let's see the scenario again. Heidi wants us to repeat the question.
Yes, of course. Frank was arrested at the library and then returns weeks later. Another patron, Angela, complains and doesn't want Frank allowed in the library. What do you do? And Patty asks, does it matter why he was arrested? There is going to be some concern about personal safety, especially if he was arrested for a violent offense.
Or he was arrested while being violent.
While being violent, it doesn't say, does it?
No.
And we don't know if Angela was actually there when Frank was arrested. Again, a little odd. Frank can be arrested, but doesn't have anything to do against the library patron behavior policy.
Right. Unless it was a library issue, we can't really ban him. Well, that's a great opportunity for us to talk about the three things. There are three reasons that a patron can be banned that will hold up legally in a court of law. A patron cannot destroy property. They cannot prevent staff from doing their work, and they cannot disturb other patrons' use of the library. So things like the patron that's odoriferous, that falls under disturbing people from using the library, especially if they've got stuff on their boots, because we have farmers that often do. Destroying property is very easy. Keeping staff from doing their jobs is kind of gray, because that can be the child after school who says, I'm hungry. Do you have anything to eat? Do you have something for me to do? I want to help. Because they're after school at the library. That can also be the lady who comes in and the perfume is following her and filling up the place, or the grandma who at the desk has been on vacation and wants to show you her vacation pictures, or her new grandchild. So that's the grayish one that you really kind of have to be careful about, because if you allow the grandma to show their pictures, but you want to march the kid out of the library because they're looking to help, those are both preventing staff from doing their job. And that's why we say that the patron behavior policy should be applied across the board without exception, not based on age. Thank you for your concern. Everyone has had a bad day. Why don't we give him a chance to have a better day today? That's very gracious. I think it also depends on the size of the library. If it's a small library, then more people are going to know people in the community. So this could be a bigger concern than it's in a medium or large library. I'm not saying that it isn't concerning, and that is true. Smaller communities, you can do things, but everybody knows.
Right. So what if Frank was arrested because of a sexual crime or a child-related crime?
Mm-hmm.
Can we ban somebody because they're on the sex registry?
It really is going to depend what their court order says. Some people are not allowed within a certain distance of a school or a library, or they're not allowed in a library during certain hours, and those would be the afternoon hours, usually when school children can't be there. Some people aren't going to be allowed ever, just depends on what their court order says. In Kansas, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation keeps a list of registered sex offenders, and you can call your county sheriff department and find out why they were registered and what their court order says. Sometimes that person is in violation of their court order. Sometimes their court order says they can go in the library, but they can't look at certain things online. And we've had a library year before last, I think. They just had a creepy feeling about this guy, and they found out that he was on the registered offenders list, and asked me what to do. And so they called their sheriff, and he was looking at pictures of little girls in swimsuits during story time. And he was allowed in the library, but he wasn't allowed to look at things like that on the internet. And so they spoke with the sheriff, and the sheriff came and took care of the situation. You can't keep them out of the library in Illinois. It's up to the sex offender to comply with the terms of their court order, and we do not have access to their court orders. See, it's really going to depend on what you've got. I am from a military family, and a number of years ago, all of our personal information, all 5 of us, was compromised. And so the government pays thousands of dollars for each of us every month, and we get all of these privacy warnings, like if a sex offender has moved into our community, if someone looked up my social security number, all kinds of things like that. And so that's how I know what's in my area. But like I said, in some places, it just depends on what your local laws or your state laws say.
But we do know that a public library is a public space. And while a lot of people think of a public library as a safe place and think it's okay to drop off my kid unattended because the library is a safe place, we also know that anybody is welcome in the library. And so there needs to be an unattended child policy for your library. That's one that needs to be separate because of age. How old can they be without parental or guardian supervision?
Mm-hmm.
How old must the guardian be is a policy you need to have on there, because we know that the public library is not, give me the right term, Gail, is not the guardian of the child in absentee of the parent.
Right,
It's a school
right.
library, but not a public library.
Right. And that's a hard thing for some board members to understand, and for some patrons to understand. For all we know, Angela isn't even a library patron, and he doesn't come to the library, but her child comes every afternoon. And she's concerned about Frank, who was arrested because perhaps he was arrested on suspicion of sexual molestation against minors. She doesn't want Frank there because of her child. And so your policy is going to really need to speak to how old that child can be by themselves, and what that looks like. And it's really important to let parents know that while children are in a school setting and in a school library setting, the adults employed there are required to act as the parent in absentia, but at public libraries, we do not do that. Kathleen says, I've had to ask a registered sex offender to leave because children were present. He did not take it well, but did leave. Our director told me the details of his court orders years previous. I think he had to tell her in the order to use our library, and that might be the case. That might be the case. Sometimes, let's talk about library service to people who aren't allowed in. Like, so if Frank was arrested and then returned and then went to trial and was convicted and wasn't allowed in the library because of children being present, how are we going to offer good service to that patron who can't step foot in our doors? Offering service in non-traditional ways is something we've all become experts at this last year, and some of us are still in that position. But if you've had to ask someone to leave, it's a really good idea to have just a 3x5 printed handout that you can say that says, here's how you can access the library without stepping foot in the door. That's good customer service, because there are going to be people who can't step in the door. And I think we'll see things like curbside delivery continuing for a long time for a number of different reasons. But this is one scenario where that might be the case.
We need to remember that because we're a rural or a small library, these problems hit our little towns as well.
Mm-hmm.
We service 54 libraries in 17 counties in the central part of Kansas, and the majority, and we're talking 70%, are towns of 800 or less. And many of those have one or maybe two people, but they're never there at the same time because you got to keep the library open. And so we've had to have some of those difficult conversations to let our librarians know that person, whether it's a registered sex offender or whatever, that person can be in your town too. They don't just hang out in the big town, which the big town might be 1,500 people. So
the small town public library is no safer
No
than a
safer.
large town public library for unattended children. I wrote two things down. I wrote board report and I wrote angry spouse. One of the things we don't know about Frank is Frank married to Angela, and Angela fears for her personal safety. Those are things we'll need to find out. If Frank was arrested because of battery, but didn't have a court order put on them, if Angela's a staff member who was the victim of that battery and she's concerned about Frank being in the library, that actually is keeping her from being able to do her job because she's fearful for her own safety. Or if it was Angela's best friend and she's the one that called the police. So those are the real sticky wickets on that one. And I've got board report down here, because if you do have someone who you have to ask to leave the library, when you as the director are preparing your board report, you would just put a patron. You wouldn't say the patron's name, because that would be violating that patron's confidentiality, because board reports are open records.
If you needed to talk about the incident in more detail and give names, that's when you would go into an executive session with your board.
Yeah.
So be very careful. You always have to be careful. It always seems like
You always do. You have to really second guess yourself a lot.
And you'll also notice that a lot of our ethic questions always turn into library safety questions too. And sometimes what is ethically right may make you feel like you are putting yourself in danger. So there's where you have to know where your line is and know what your policy is and know what your library can do to help you.
Yes, and your board needs to know these things as well. The board writes the policies not just for the benefit of the patron, but to keep the staff safe. When they understand that's an important responsibility in this day and age, they're going to look at policies very differently.
All right.
Beth, let's move on to a slightly lighter one.
All right. How about this one? Is this lighter? A staff member is very friendly at the circulation desk. When making conversation, she often editorializes on what patrons are checking out. What do you do? Leave that up for a little bit. while people are thinking about this, I'm going to share a little pet peeve I have with I believe it's a Progressive commercial, and it has the guy that comes in and helps you not act like your parents. And one of them is like, who else reads books about submarines? And the guy's like, my dad. And I always yell at the TV. I'm like, it doesn't matter what people read as long as they enjoy it. So anyway, that was my little pet peeve.
But on the next commercial, he is teaching them how to open a PDF and silence their cell phones. So,
There you go.
it all works out.
And I don't know what they're talking about. I'm not the TV watcher. They forever have to explain things to me. And I'm like, what? Why is that funny? Because I've missed the entire previous season.
So
Go ahead, Patty.
On the editorializing, I just have to share a real life scenario because this one might be the one that might get your hackles up a little bit. I moved into a library. A person had, I was in a military situation. A person had left, but when they moved back to town, she reapplied for a job. But I had learned something about her in the meantime. And so I had some fear. She happened to be working in the library when the first Harry Potter book came out. And she was a pastor's wife. And over the desk, she would do, in her very sweet and wonderful way, she would look at a child and go, do you think that your mama would want you reading that book about witches? And so I was hesitant as the head of circulation to allow this person to return. And it was a very different retraining because this was one of the things that I put out there on the first day of training. Usually that's like on the third or fourth day, but it had to be on the first day because I knew she was going to be familiar with the community and with the space. So I had to make sure that that one was out there right off the bat, that editorializing, and it didn't matter the age of the patron or the nature of the material.
Right.
She was also working there when 50 Shades came out. So there was more training to happen. So 50 Shades and Harry Potter were items that created some interesting conversation at the desk where I work.
We live in rural Kansas. And after we run through this training, it seems like there's nothing safe to talk about. And people say you can always talk about the weather, but I'm telling you, the weather is not a safe topic with farmers. They can be as grumpy as can be because it's sunny for another day or it's snowy when it should be green. It can be tricky. Editorializing isn't the best thing. And so staff at the front desk become a little uncomfortable. They need to have things to talk about with their patrons. Hi, how are you today? Did you find everything you're looking for? You can't say, I love that book, or I found another one that I think you're going to like. There has to be a good way to do that. Editorializing can also be part of the reference interview, bringing in politics, etc. When we had this election and inauguration, I made sure to visit with my staff about what's appropriate to say and what's not. If someone asks you, did you vote? And who'd you vote for? Those are two separate questions. What's the appropriate response? Can you wear I voted today sticker? You can, but if somebody asks you about it, you just say, I can't talk about that when I'm at work.
And it's also very challenging when you have a very chatty patron who just loves to chat, and they're telling you all this sort of stuff, and it's very much a one-sided conversation at that point because you're nodding, you're listening, but you can't really add anything to that either. And I think this scenario, it's a couple issues because one, it may be shaming somebody for what they're reading or bringing attention to what they're reading. But if anybody else is in the library, any other patron, they can hear what you're talking about. And what if they're bringing up a book about Crohn's disease or some disease that they don't want anybody else to know that they're researching? You're just violated their privacy right there.
So what I've noticed about myself is when I'm listening, I lean in and I shake my head and I say, I'm not agreeing with what they're saying. So that's something I have to be careful about, is my body language, because my body language might be agreeing with them, even though my brain is not. And that I've realized this just recently. Somebody pointed out to me, it's really hard to change that, but it could be perceived as agreeing when I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, let's get this over with. Let's be on the road. So it's tricky. What if someone starts complaining about the library during a transaction and expects staff to agree with them? I just think well, here's what I've had to do before. And I actually saw someone do this, and they learned it at Disney, and it was her husband they were complaining about. It wasn't in a library. They were complaining about it, and she said, "Oh my, that just sounds really difficult." Or that must be frustrating to you. You come up with those neutral phrases that say, you don't say, I understand that you're upset by this, but you just say, oh, that copy machine can be a real bugaboo. Come up with those really sorts of neutral phrases that acknowledge the patron's frustration or complaint without agreeing with them.
And
You could always also ask, if those complaints get real vigorous and real charged, you can ask them if they'd like to fill out a complaint form or if they would like to speak to the director. And the director is going to know how to, my friend called this Mortonizing because she learned it at Disney and the instructor was Morton, learned how to Mortonize the situation to bring it down. Oftentimes, as the director, when I have staff members come to me complaining, I'll listen. And then I say, did you just need me to listen, or do you want me to do something about it? And often it's just that I just needed somebody to listen, or I need you to be aware of this so we can watch for it. That's the case with patrons. What if the patron initiates conversation about a shared book and wants to discuss it? That's a very different scenario. Patron initiates it. Of course, it's going to depend on what the book is and what the conversation. If they want to talk about 50 Shades of Grey in great intimate detail at the circulation desk, you'll have to steer that conversation otherwise. You may also want to know if the patron wants to join the book club. That's a great place to talk about books that you're reading. If you've got time at the circ desk and there's nobody else waiting and you find you have a shared author in the same, that's different than saying, oh, I love this book by so-and-so, other than editorializing about what they're reading.
Or you should read this, because that's a whole nother message. I had a situation with this years and years ago. A lady came in. I was working the search desk at lunch hour. She came in. She dropped something that was on the new bookshelf. She had just brought it back. She dropped it. She said, "This is a dirty book." And immediately the staff member who was helping her, said, "Thank you for returning it. And I'll check it in off your account. Hope you can find something else today." Sends her on her way. And immediately everybody's back in the back office going, "I have to read the dirty book now."
What is it? What's the dirty part?
And it was
You're muted now, Miss Patty.
I can't hear you. Try again.
I'm working.
There you go. Maybe you were speaking at that level that only dogs can hear.
The story time lady level where I go sometimes.
When you get loud, you go, "Where are you behind? Nobody can hear you." Yeah. What's next?
Let's find out. All right. We're going to take a very long break because we get chatty and we're running a little behind, but I love sloths, so I'm sharing the sloth with you today. If that doesn't make you smile, well, we'll find something cute that makes you smile.
That's right. It's very cute. Very cute. And
All
we're
right.
seeing all of your things, not the slideshow view right now.
Oh, well, whoops. Well, we don't want that. Try again. Yeah. How about
And
that?
even the scenarios that we don't get to today, you'll have access to. So, and we're always happy to talk.
Scenario 4. This one was probably going to hit pretty close to home after the last year. A small rural community is experiencing an outbreak of seasonal influenza. A sign posted on the library entrance states children will not be allowed into the library until the outbreak is under control. What do you do?
We really want to hear from you on this one. This is a real scenario.
And if it makes you more comfortable to answer it, you can change it from seasonal flu to COVID-19.
Jill says it would not seem to have legal standing unless the health department mandated it. That's a great answer, Jill. There's a lot of right answers here. This took place in a community where the flu was racing through the schools. And if you ask people in that community, they think it is predominantly elderly, but their census data shows otherwise.
And think about it this way. What if we changed the sign that says people over 65 are not allowed in the library?
They're certainly more vulnerable to flu than the children. Pam says if you post the sign, you have to follow through and not allow children inside the library. Excluding classes of people is not good. You can discriminate in so many ways without even thinking about it. This library thought they were keeping the elderly portion of their community safe, and they were discriminating by age again in the opposite direction. What age is a child? 18 and under, 16 and under. What if that child is 16 and emancipated? Are they going to be allowed in? Because they fit both child and adult.
Are you carting people at the door because some children don't look like children and some adults look like very young? So how are you going to determine who's allowed in the library?
I am very particular about library signs. My very first ARSL presentation years ago when we were down in Plano, Texas, was all about library signage, the good, the bad, and the ugly it was. I think that signs like that are just asking for trouble. ACLU would have had a heyday with that sign, and that library would have been fighting a lawsuit. You can close the library doors and allow by appointment only, but you can't discriminate against any one age or another. Can't do it. It is way, way wrong. Yes, Linda, why only children? Well, I think they thought they were keeping the sick kids away from senior citizens. And so to me, this is an opportunity for us, the three of us, to do some education. Not just the librarians, but maybe it came from the board and the librarians didn't know the language to tell the board that we can't do that. So it's trustee training and librarian training as well.
And Maribeth did point out what if the sign said over 65, but Gail, you hit on an interesting thing. If we're protecting those over 65, then who's protecting those under 16? There's always going to be that next level. Right. And what looks like an easy question when you first read it can go really, really, really difficult. And there's a lot of education. Can you imagine being a board member and having the librarian bring this to you? What does it look like from the board member side? And what if the board member relies on the library being the place for her child to go because she works out of town?
Mm-hmm.
Or if the schools are closed because there's a flu epidemic and the kids who don't have any
healthy
go spend their day in the library
because they still have homework, but they don't have an internet connection at home.
Right. Do you have the money and time to enforce such a sign?
And to fight the lawsuit that could ensue.
And what if a child is sitting on the steps of the library to get to the Wi-Fi and then something happens on the steps?
Yep.
They get, it's a cold day or whatever, it's colder than they thought. They get sick, or there's an altercation out there. What if it's a group of teens that are hanging out on the steps because they can't go into the library?
Oh, and one of them has a skateboard because those are the tools of the devil.
And then, your older patrons don't feel like they can go in the library now because the teens are blocking the door.
Right.
There's so many issues. Okay. Patty says she has a question in the chat.
I have a new question about children.
Okay.
Particularly children's books. How do you handle shelf location for a series that started out in YA with the main characters being under 21 but over 13? But the latest book in the series has a main character that's 25 and the book is very explicit.
So can we make some assumptions here, or should we ask for clarification? Is their library big enough to have a separate area for shelving books for children, teens, and adults? Can we make that assumption?
I say we're making that assumption because they used YA. So I'm assuming that there is a teen space, or at least a teen shelf.
Okay.
So I'm going to
Do they
use an
shelve
example.
series together? And are they marked with series number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Are they hidebound to that? And that word was deliberately chosen.
The person says we have a YA and an adult section far away from children. I'm going to give an example of something that I have experienced. If you all know Phyllis Reynolds Naylor's Alice books. In the early books and in the prequels, Alice is very sweet. She does learn some things a little quicker than maybe Kansas kids might have learned, but we always say we're 3 years behind some stuff. But I was shelving those in JF, but I was luckily a fan of Alice, and I knew when things changed. Half of the Alice collection was in YA and half of it was in JF, because as we get Alice to about 7th grade, we are dealing with some very grown-up topics. We only had 2 years of her actually being in Blunderland and in Wonderland over in the children's section. But when it changed, it was a very quick change. And I was a little prepared for it, as I knew Naylor had already written some things that were a little edgy, like Bloom and some of the others. But that, in that case, the series did separate. Many libraries separate Harry Potter 1 to 4 in the children's and 5 to 7 in the YA, because 5 gets very dark.
I have a question. If I am 11-year-old Susie and I discovered the Alice books in JF and I absolutely adore them, and I have been trained how to use the catalog, and I find that there are others in the YA department, and I go and I get one for myself, what? Do I just get to check it right out? And by myself, my mother, I'm 11, I can be at the library by myself.
Absolutely. Now,
yay, Laura, absolutely. Yes, you do. Rock on. Yes.
Yes.
If somebody looks at me and says, is this the same? Is this the same Alice? Yeah, it's the same girl, but we have some more grown-up things. And that's my response. And then I just move on.
That's right.
The patron who asked the question about the YA says they do not need to shelve series altogether. So is this panel saying that they can live between YA and adult if that's where the librarian makes that decision?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because
that has to be a judgment call. It might help if you had some guidelines. They don't need to be in your collection policy, but some guidelines for your catalogers to know, look through the I'm coming up blank subject headings and see, follow your reviews.
And
here's the deal with deciding where to put things is you decide to put things where they're going to see the most use.
We are at 11:10, so I know we need to be wrapping up, I believe. I think we're till 11:15. So if you have any questions for us, please get those in the chat. I'm going to bring us back to parentis in absentia and remind everybody that, of course, school libraries are charged differently than public libraries, and there should not be any policy restricting patrons' access to materials.
Right. No matter what their age.
And that also deals with, as you'll see the scenarios when you look through the handouts later, you'll see the bonus scenario is about a parent calling about what's on a 15-year-old's library card. And as we approached before, Gail and I learned the hard way some things about what Kansas law says about allowing information to parents about a minor's library card, information that we did not know, and I had,
nor do we agree with.
I had fervently defended for the first 20 years of my library career.
Me too.
But the the nature of what's on a card.
We've got until 11:30.
Yay.
So the scenario reads, a parent receives an overdue notice, contacts the library to find out what the items are. And so there's two parts of that question. That's one of those. It's the what. It's not about the overdue itself.
So let's have everybody be thinking about that, but let's go back one.
Okay, this one.
Yes. This is real, from real life. Several adults without children sign up and attend online story time. They do not turn on their cameras, so staff cannot tell if there are children present for the program. What do you do? And we'll leave this up for just a moment. Lots and lots of different options here. Thank you, Maribeth.
Yeah. So when I first heard this question, I was kind of like, what's the big deal? People are attending your programs, that's awesome. But then when you start to think about online access and children's privacy in the library and consent to have your image shared on social media, then you kind of start to see all the different facets of this question. We want to make sure that we can share our programming online, and we've seen the value of that this last year. We're not going to be able to limit who can come on, especially if you do like a Facebook Live or something. It's open to everybody, and you won't know who is on the other end.
Jill, you got my answer there. She says, what do? We do nothing. Why can't they join? Maybe they have developmental disabilities that make this approach good for them. Can you really have a policy that restricts adults without children from joining? Welcome to social media. Are adults not allowed to attend story time? Can you force virtual attendees to share their camera? What if they don't have a camera? Maybe it is someone that cannot read and they wanted to listen to a story. Maybe I'm the grandmother and my grandchildren are there in the other state watching, and I want to watch how they have story time.
It's like joining, yeah, it's like a virtual joining with your grandkids to enjoy the meeting.
If you're the administrator of the Zoom meeting, you can simply make it so their camera is off and their mic is muted automatically.
So now let's think about it of the privacy on the camera side. What are you showing on the camera? Are you just showing your storyteller, or is this like a mixed in-person / Facebook Live and there are children shown in your camera, in your screen or whatever? How are you just seeing the back of children's heads? Are you seeing their faces? Did the parents or the children consent to share your faces on there? This is where I think, this is where I start to have hesitation about, not about letting people join, but how am I going to present my online programming?
What is my policy going to say about that? Right. This can also be, we think we've worked out all the kinks on this online presentation stuff by now, but there are always going to be things that pop up, just as with other patron behaviors. Do you have people sign up ahead of time? Do you admit them into a waiting room? So many things. Linda says we would never show children on social media without parental consent. Right. That's right. It should be anybody on social media without consent. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a signed consent form. You can have a sort of a disclaimer on the door when people come in that say, let us know if you want to opt out is easier than the other way around. But we really have to be thinking about this. Regarding virtual programming, publisher permissions may be the least of our problems. Oh, I was going to say that sounds like Patty, and indeed it is, and that's true. It's as we continue to move forward, some libraries are still closed. We start to think about all of these different things that can come into play. And as I'd said before, our normal patron behavior policies won't necessarily cover those. how do we have people register or sign ahead? Do we verify who they are when they sign up and they're online? But this one can also, let's bring this out of the virtual world and into a physical face-to-face sort of a situation. Are adults allowed to loiter or look for books or sit and use a chair in the children's room or the teen room if they don't have a child with them? What does your policy say there?
Or can grandpa walk into story time by himself? That's in a closed room. Or one of the things that most often gets these chatters on some of the places that I follow is, what about adult use of a teen room? We make a lot of assumptions, and we're all very guilty of it. Sometimes we go to the worst. We make the assumption that the person who wants to hang out in a teen room is there to do something wrong. And we make that assumption. If grandpa just wants to come and watch story time and he just didn't come in with mom and dad and Johnny, and he walks in later, in a lot of places he's going to be told you can't come in because he does not have a child with him. And rather than that interruption of, well, Johnny's sitting right up there, I just like to come and sit with my family, he's already boosted out the door before there's any opportunity to explain. And so we have to take a look at situations, and truly, as we've said again and again, everything is situational. We have to look at things from all sides, and we have to look at how is the best way that we can serve everyone.
Right.
And sometimes that's the hardest question that we have to face every single morning, because as I did the story with Mr. Johnson, sometimes I don't want to deal with him, or some days Maribeth doesn't want to deal with him, and we have to take turns because there's only so many of us to go through.
Well, and one of the things that we always have to remember is that if we have policies that are not enforceable or are very difficult to enforce, as library board members or as directors, we're putting our staff in conflict. We're not supporting them. We're not tending to the care and feeding of those library staff members. And to me, that's one of the most important roles of a director and a board member, is to take good care of them, because we ask them to do amazing things with very little money in return. We need to also, when we're talking about policies, understand that most people who come into library work are very compassionate people, and we have to proceed with empathy and understanding and compassion in all instances, even if we've got a situation that raises our hackles or we think is creepy. We need to be able to be empathetic and understanding to the patron. Now, if they're committing violence or burning the room down, we're going to have a very different response. Of course, we're going to have an appropriate response. But when we're writing policies, we need to be understanding that everyone can use the library. And if for whatever reason they can't physically enter the library, we need to let them know how library service can get to them. It's not easy to write policy, and it's not easy to write procedure, but they're often best done by committee. When you're working on things like strategic planning, you think that a committee is nothing but a pain in the neck, because that means everybody has an opinion, and that opinion is very important. But when you're talking about policy and procedure, I think a committee is a far better approach to this, because you get more insight from those different viewpoints. And that's really beneficial, because you can't see everything for yourself. And having a number of people that you can bounce things off of, if you're in a library by yourself, make that happen for you and for the people on down the road as well. It bounce things off. Hey, I had a scenario like this happen. Here's how I handle it. I need some ideas on how I could have done this better, because it's not sitting comfortably with me. That's an important thing that a one-person library especially needs. And that doesn't need to be your board, because they might never find themselves in a situation like that.
And remember, the librarian down the road comes with that experience. they also might come with that exact situation because that patron may be running the circuit. They've already been through all the rest of the libraries in the county. It just happens to be your turn. And that helps you be in a much better situation.
Yeah.
Okay, we are at 11:21. We have 10 minutes left. Should we move to the last one, the bonus
Yes.
one? Okay. All right, so let me go to the next one. There we go. This is the one that Patty shared with us a little earlier. A mother receives an overdue notice and contacts the library to find out all the materials checked out on her 15-year-old daughter's account. What do you do?
I'll start.
Okay.
The first thing that is absolutely crucial for you to know is what do your state laws say? We know what our profession says. Our profession steers us in patron confidentiality, and we know what our profession says, but what do your state laws say? Does anybody know? We know what they are in Kansas, and we were not happy to find this out. In Kansas, our state laws say we give the information away. Is it the library's policy to inform parents what age about their children's items? I would want to discuss this only with the parent. Absolutely right.
Patron.
And that is, we follow the guidelines that our profession gives us in all circumstances. Our state law says that we give the parents the information, but we don't have to make it easy for them. I worked at a library where the policy stated if the parent was financially responsible, we had to tell them. And there is that as well. What does your policy say? At what age can a child get a card on their own? That's something that needs to be considered in this scenario as well. You could just say that she has 7 items out. You can do that. Absolutely. One of the things, so let's change the age of the child to age 8. And that makes the situation so different, especially if the parent has to sign for the child or the parent is on the card as well as the responsible person. Our overdue notices don't list the titles. They list the barcodes. They don't list the titles. And that way, then we're keeping that confidentiality there, because who knows who opens whose mail in a household.
Well, I'm Janie's mom, and if you just have barcodes, how am I supposed to find these books?
Right. And so if you come in and you can show me that you're Janie's mom, one of the things that I've done in the past is turn them around so you know what they look like. I show you the OPAC with the cover of the book. It's probably not that you care so much what the exact title is how are we going to find these books in that bedroom? Or this is we had 3 books fallen back behind the bed in the wall. How are we going to find that right one? And it really is, it's going to depend on the age of the child and what your law says. Anna says, I don't think Illinois law speaks to this specifically. Tina says, another thing is to let the parent know how to look at the card information online. Yes, and so that's one way that parent, when you are issuing that card to that minor and the parent is signing for it, there should be a little slip that you can give them that shows them how to access their account information online. And that slip should say, maybe, we won't be able to provide you with specifics like titles and things like that, but you can easily access this information online. This is one of those real gray areas where your professional ethics and your personal ethics might collide.
Go ahead.
So just to finish this conversation up, I'm going to be very honest with you in the fact where this happened to a staff member of mine. The topic of the book was such that I was not comfortable outing this 15-year-old girl. And so I just said, you know, we appreciate you looking for the item. We're just going to go ahead and remove it from the card. If she happens to find it, she can just drop it in the book drop. But rather than dealing with it, I was ready to take the $15 cost of how do I know if I've been molested? Take that item out of our collection and get it off of this person's card to be replaced later, because this had to be the time where I was allowed at middle management to make the decision, and this was the right one. I had no idea she was doing a report, and at that point, I didn't care.
Right.
I just had to make a decision, and
When
luckily, I was supported by management.
Yes, when we call and let people know that their holds have arrived, we just say the item that you requested has arrived. We don't give titles. You never know who's listening to the answering machine or who it is that answers. And so we can't give away the farm that way. Jill says, I used to have to do this when I worked at a video store that had porn. Try calling an over 18 kid who lives with his parents. His mom picks up the phone and wants to be helpful by looking in his room. So what's the title? I tried really hard, very uncomfortable situations. Absolutely right. We carry materials in the library that are on a lot of really hard topics because people need that information, but they don't need us to share that information that they're looking at with others. And so we were very, very upset to find out that Kansas requires us to give all the information to the parents, but it doesn't require us to make it easy. We can say, you need to come into the library and we'll be able to help you with this. You know, maybe they want a printout or whatever. Know what your state law says. We were really sad about this.
We have about 2 minutes left. So I'm going to show you our last screen here. And then it does have the bibliography and links, which also will be in your chat. Patty will do that again for us.
Yes, Patty says you're doing amazing work. It is hard. Any one of you could have had any of these scenarios or hundreds of others on a daily basis. And this is not a one and done kind of a training. This is something that you have to work on forever and ever. And we commend you for taking the first step to get started in that with us today.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. This has just been a phenomenal presentation. You've covered a lot of ground, and having worked in libraries myself for over 40 years, I can tell you, you hit on a lot of things we face every single day. And I want to say thank you. And
It's our pleasure.
A round of applause for everyone else out there. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing all of these books, all of these bibliographies, your email. And you have said that you are willing to answer questions if
We are.
To you. So
we are. We believe that presenting the ideas to you and saying this is right or that is wrong is not the best way for you to learn through this. This is something you have to work through. Take your time. If you've got staff members and you want to start the training in it, use the slides. You're going to have access to that, and then have them talk about it. They're all going to need to come to a place of comfort and understanding with this as well. We suggest you do that. Thank you, everyone. You are awesome, and this is tough, and being a librarian is not easy work, and you stay up. I'm glad you thought it was wonderful. Glad you were able to join us, and hello to everybody who might be joining us on an archive. We love you too.
thank you. No, I'm hoping that people will use this with their staff as a discussion start.
Absolutely right. That's how we intend it. Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
is not a one and done.
Thank you.
We're
So
lucky enough to be on this side of the panel today, but we've walked in your shoes. We know how hard your job is, and we just want to tell you that you're rocking awesome. And we thank you for your service to your patrons and your communities. You're doing great.
Yes, yay. Yay,
thank you, ladies. You're welcome to stay if you want, but you don't have to. We're going to go on and get an update from our state library. So thank you very much. I'm going to switch to Pat Berg. Are you out there, Pat?
I am here. Hello. My understanding is Greg McCormick is also going to be on the call. I'm not sure if he's here yet. I know he was planning to be here.
Okay, well, would you like us to go to Leslie and then we can come back to you?
We're here, Pat Berg here and Rita Stevens and Beth King. Yeah, we're here. We enjoyed the program that you just had. So my understanding was that Greg was going to be here, so maybe you can look for him and we'll circle back. And if not, then I'll be happy to give a report.
Okay, Leslie, are you ready to speak?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank our friends from Kansas again. Thank you so much, ladies. It's a joy to sit through one of your sessions. And I just have a few updates to give you. I've got my notes. They're color-coded. Oh, you may not be able to see them. Sorry. That's also what my grocery shopping list looked like. Well, when I used to go into the store anyway. So first of all, we're at what I think one of the best times for me anyway, looking forward and looking back at the same time. Space at the library system. We are actively engaged in building our fiscal year 2022 budget, as well as putting together and developing our operational plan for the same year. Those are the two primary components in our system area and per capita grants. So those are all due to the state library no later than the end of May. We'd like to get those going, and our board will start, and committees will start looking at those beginning of April. Also, I wanted to remind everybody that the deadline for the public library per capita grants is March 15, and that I know a lot of you are currently engaged in the annual certification process, and that deadline is May 15th. And a big shout out to public libraries and our Heartland service area, because you're rocking this process so far this year. So keep it up. That's all for me. Thanks, Miss Anna.
Thank you, Leslie. I don't see Greg yet, so I'm going to go to Cassandra for a share update.
Thanks so much, Anna. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I thought that this session was just phenomenal. Thank you for such great information. I actually also wanted to remind everyone that if you have privacy concerns with your library, one of the issues that we faced recently with the legislative body was concern over hold shelves and privacy, patron privacy. So SHARE did recommend that you change your hold shelves to maintain patron privacy using an alphanumeric code or hiding the information of who is checking out what. And so if you haven't done that, if you missed that conversation, you can certainly reach out to me or Dina Porter, and we will be happy to review with you some options on your hold slips. So I do want to just mention that. I also wanted to add a comment with Leslie with the Illinois traffic survey. We do have some information on the SHARE website if you are a SHARE member on how to get data for your reciprocal borrowing and your interlibrary loan numbers. And so there's a training video, as well as some written instructions. We don't send those out to you automatically anymore. So if you do need some instructions on how to find that data, it is available for you, or you can always, of course, email me as well. Now, the big news for SHARE is we are considering a mobile app, and so it's through the Solus app company. And we did have a demo back in February. It is available now on the SHARE website. And we have also, in addition to the demo, we have a fact sheet if you have questions. And if you don't have time to watch the hour demo, I know, who has that kind of time. If you just want a brief overview, there's also a series of shorter videos so you can get an idea and a feel for what it's like. We are requesting member comment at this time. And so the SHARE Finance and Policy Committee has made a recommendation to consider the options for paying for this product before we send it to the Share Executive Council. We would really like to see what you think, because we do want to make sure that we are moving forward with a product that the majority of our members feel are going to add value to our whole Share program. And so that is right there on the first page of our Share website, the first article that's available. And if you have any questions that aren't addressed either through the videos or on the fact sheet, I would love to talk to you more about it. If you have questions, you can send me an email. We can set up time to chat. I'd be happy to do that. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope you are too. And so I look forward to getting your feedback. And does anybody have any questions?
Great. I see Ellen posted the tutorials for the ILL traffic survey for the Share people. So thank you, Ellen.
Thanks.
Makes it so much easier. Okay, Susan Palmer, are you out there and ready to share about delivery?
Yes, hi. Wow, that time really flew. That was really, really interesting. Really, all I'm got is that we are down to that 48 hours of quarantine time for IHLS. Again, your library, your quarantine time, you know your community, you know how to interact, and you figure out your quarantine policy. We do have on our website a really lovely graphic that Shandy was able to create that kind of helps figure out who's quarantine time where and why things are still taking a little bit of time. We are still practicing the mandatory hand washing. If you're sick, go home for our own staff. And we're spraying tubs, and we're practicing those COVID related procedures to help keep things clean. And basically, IHLS is kind of a pass-through. Your libraries are the ones who are getting those direct items from that patron. We already are getting them, but it's not, the patron has walked in and handed us their items. So I think everybody's doing a great job. And that's basically my update. Probably you will never hear that quick of an update again, but.
Now,
Do you have-
do we
Go
have
ahead.
any idea what the average travel time for an item is in the system? I know that it's very difficult to determine, first of all, because we've had so many bad weather days in the past. So I'm sure and then, it's like, hey, we're just kind of the pass through, and it's up to each library. And I know individual libraries, some of them keep items in quarantine for a lot longer than other libraries. So it's hard to judge. I know that there was some rumbling on the director's listserv. I know people are frustrated, but is there any kind of help tips or anything you can throw out, Susan?
I did try to respond to that, and it really is dependent on what each library is doing. For as long as what IHLS in the center part is doing, it's 48 hours. So you add that on to, maybe there's libraries who are still doing the 7 days, perfectly fine. No judgment on this at all. Some libraries are doing 5, some libraries are doing 3, and it depends on their own, and if they're pulling those items from a shelf that maybe already have been quarantined, so it gets out a little bit quicker, or is that a return, so it has to go underneath that quarantine? There's really no easy way, but I think it's getting a little bit better. The numbers are still going up. We are not quite at last year, March at this time, but they're getting closer. So I think that indicates that there is kind of not a relaxing of quarantine time, because it's going to be a little bit longer, but it indicates that there's still people who want to borrow and still use the library, because that is very hard to to juggle that being viable and being safe. So I anticipate within a month, because anytime that we reduce the quarantine times, it left us with a backlog of items in our hubs to get going through. And we had and we have to be cognizant of our staff too. So saying that, I would anticipate within a month that you're really going to see quicker turnaround times. And I know it's frustrating, and we're just in that world now.
Well,
So
it's a very complex issue that we've all been dealing with. And I think that I'm going to do some bragging on IHLS staff. And I think that actually the delivery people have been very flexible and have done the best they can in these situations. So it's like, we know you're frustrated, but we really are working to make it all better, I think, is the bottom line. So.
yes, I thank everyone, and I appreciate that, and we'll definitely share that with the staff, because sometimes they're frustrated as well. You know, when you think back to how we had next day turnaround in our hubs, that's no longer the source of pride, but rightfully so. So what we've done is that we've tried to now motivate all of our staff, all of us, into what can we focus on that's positive. And the things that it is that we are taking the care. We're taking that time to make sure that those items are going through as safely as they can. We are encouraging people, if they're sick, you stay home. You know, it's a culture change too, because there was pride in coming to work no matter what, but that's no longer the case in the culture. You know, now stay home and take care of yourself. I think I would never wish for a pandemic. I know I've said this loads of times, but I think there's some positive things that are coming out of this, and that's where we've chosen to focus. So thank you for your words, Anna, honestly.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think most of our libraries are doing the same things, where they're showing great concern for their staff. And I think that's important too. It's like, so all of those decisions are going to make it a little slower. So we just, patience, all of us, continued. It seems like we've been patient for a long time. But anyway, I don't know if this
At one point, I thought we should contact Amazon and tell Mr. Bezos how he could really function with delivery. But you know, even now, where that used to be kind of that standard that we were trying to compete against for libraries, even now, I don't think twice when it's over a week or something for my items to come. So I think our expectations are changing too. So that's helpful.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks.
you. Pat, do you want us to wait a little bit longer, or would you go ahead?
I think it's okay to proceed. I don't have a whole lot to add, but I do want to emphasize that the per capita grant is humming along very well. And if you have any questions at all, the point person for that project is Jake Magnuson here at the State Library. Obviously, members and staff people at IHLS do a beautiful job as well, but if you're needing any help here from the State Library, Jake is your person. With regard to the traffic survey, that sounds really great about the webinar and all of those instructions. Everything, all of these things and anything that can be added is always welcome and wonderful for the members. I will emphasize that Gwen Harrison here at the State Library additionally can assist you with your traffic survey should you have any questions at all. And I'm so happy that for the public libraries, we've got all of those March 1 deadlines in for their Illinois Public Library annual report. And just a small thing to mention about that, we are currently in the process of planning for 2022 for the IPLAR, and in conjunction with IMLS and the Public Library Survey. And today, I will be attending a seminar about those changes. And I think libraries will be happy to know that there will be some greater delineation regarding live virtual programming, which of course came up in this talk, which was really, really great, this presentation that was here. So, you know, we're really going to have a much more refined programming section for the IPLAR in 2022, and it's certainly taken the work of all of the states to do this, and so I'm very excited about it. I'm attending the webinar for the ballot for the changes for the 2022 with regard to the federal questions, and then some post-ballot meetings as well. And one of the things that we were talking about recently is for some of these national groups that we are participating with, you hate to say there's any kind of benefit to the pandemic, but now we are meeting much more regularly with the use of virtual tools and conferencing, whereas we might have met 4 times a year, but now, you know, those of us that are state data coordinators across the country are meeting on an almost monthly basis. And so we're able to share that. We always have listservs like every other organization, but it's nice to get that feedback back and forth about what's going on in every state so that we can try and give an apples to apples picture to the federal government as far as these decisions are made. And it's been almost a year now since, you know, this watershed moment of live virtual programming came about. And so I'm just personally really happy that we're able to plan in the very near future to remedy that and to be able to collect that data more effectively. And I know Rita had a PNG workshop just yesterday, and maybe you would like to talk a little bit about it.
It was absolutely wonderful. We had 42 attendees, and all our sites were able to make it except 2. One had a meeting, and the other, Matson's had a lot of on and off, and she was doing curbside, and she just wasn't able to attend. But it absolutely was wonderful for everyone to see each other. We went all the way from Sparta all the way up to, you know, Chicagoland sites, and they all seemed, you know, they had their problems not being able to offer service, which has been difficult, but they've been able to compensate by, you know, working around as their area is opening up a bit. They're able to offer services, done a lot of make and take with them, and then also stayed on track. They've turned in all their quarterly reports just as they should. And we've just, you know, I'm amazed how much they've been able to accomplish and still stay on track with all this going on with everything else. But it was an absolutely wonderful meeting.
Thanks, Rita.
Yep, anytime.
But I don't really have anything else to report.
I have a question from chat, and somebody asked who at the state library can help with an E-rate question? Is there anyone there who could handle that?
Her name is Sarah Kunz, K-U-N-Z.
Okay. All right. I hope that helps. I think that's it. Thank you very much. I'm sure it's busy at the state library as it always is.
Very busy right now, yes. Especially with all of these deadlines coming in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you for letting us join in.
Ellen, I've saved the best for last, and I didn't talk to Ellen about whether she was going to cover membership or not. I just assumed, which is not the best thing to do. So Ellen, would you like to talk about membership and other issues?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And my portion of the morning is going to be kind of the save the date portion. So bear with me, and you'll see these dates in our newsletters and through the director's chats and things like that. ILA is doing a series of trustee forums, and the first one will be on March 13th. They're very affordable, really good information for library directors and your trustees. Obviously, they're all going to be done virtually. You can see them in the event section of the ILA website and really think about taking advantage of them. I believe they're 9 to noon on a Saturday in March, a Saturday in April, and a Saturday in May. Our sexual harassment training offered by the Holoback Company is going to be on March 23rd. This will fulfill your legal obligation to do an annual sexual harassment training. There is a small charge for that if you register before the early bird deadline, and I believe that fee is $15.50, and that is on L2, so that's March 23rd. Susan and several of our staff members have been working really hard on reaching forward south. And the great news is that that event will be held on April 15th and 16th. And it's partnering this year with Reaching Forward, which will be held on May 7th. And for one reasonable, accessible registration fee, any registrant or attendee can attend both sessions. So that's a great opportunity, especially for a lot of frontline staff to get some really valuable training. And then finally, the Illinois Leadership Program, Elevate, will be held on April 24th, I believe. Yes, it is, April 24th. And the applications for that end on this Friday. And if you're interested in anything to do with EDI, the keynote speaker for that is very accomplished. And again, that's going to be another Saturday morning event from 9 till noon. So these are things you can take advantage of. We'll make sure you have links to them and things like that. But that's my save the date. And thank you, Leslie and Pat Berg, for giving plugs for the certification. Anna will be the contact person for academic libraries and public libraries, and I'll be the contact person for school libraries and special libraries, but that doesn't mean we won't answer the phone if anybody calls about anything. So that's what I have today. Oh, Shandy just said we've passed the early bird deadline for the sexual harassment prevention training, but the regular rate's only a few dollars more. So please take advantage of it. It's going to be a great training. And again, it's going to tick one box off your to-do list for this year. Thanks, Anna.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I see Jill asked if the trustee forums will be recorded for later viewing. That's an ILA decision, and I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't think so, but it's you could contact ILA directly and they could give you an answer, or you may be able to persuade them. Who knows? And then, Joe asked, she has signed up for the sexual harassment prevention training, and she's wondering when she'll get an invoice. Believe me, we will find you and we will invoice you. You don't need to worry about that. I will try to have someone, I'll try to find out the answer to that, Joe, and contact you a little later on. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you joining us. I hope you enjoyed the program as much as I did. Those ladies are phenomenal. I mean, I think we could probably have gone all afternoon with just asking questions and hearing more scenarios. But I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day and joining us. And I hope it was worthwhile. Thank you. Bye.